What's up, everybody? It's 8:40 in the evening. Just came out of Bible study. Went to the fights last night. And today is the 13th of March. It's Sunday. Okay, I'm going to start with Chapter 3. Man, the Sinner. I just paid a parking ticket the other day. It was easy. I read the charge against me, flipped the ticket over, checked the box that said, I plead guilty to the charge. Filled out a check for $35 to the Metropolitan Traffic Citation Department, sealed the envelope, and dropped it in the mail. I'm a convicted criminal. For some reason, though, even though I checked the guilty box, I don't feel terribly guilty. I'm not going to lose any sleep over my walk on the wrong side of the law. I don't feel the need to ask anyone's forgiveness. And now that I think about it, I'm even a little bitter that the ticket was $10 more than the previous one I got. Why don't I feel bad about breaking the law? I suppose it's because when you get it right down to it, breaking a parking regulation just doesn't strike me as being all that important or all that heinous. Yes, I'll be sure to drop an extra nickel in the meter next time, but my conscience isn't exactly torn up over the whole thing. One thing I've noticed over the years is that most people tend to think of sin, especially their own, as not much more than a parking infraction. Yes, of course, we think technically sin is a violation of the law handed down by God on high and all that, but surely he must know there are bigger criminals out there than me. Besides, nobody was hurt, and I'm willing to pay the fine. And come on, there's no need for a whole lot of soul searching over something like this, is there? Well, I guess not. At least not if you think of sin in that cool way. But according to the Bible, sin is a lot more than just a violation of some impersonal, arbitrary, heavenly traffic regulation. It's the breaking of a relationship. And even more, it is a rejection of God himself. A repudiation of God's rule, God's care, God's authority, and God's right to command those who he gave life. In short, it is the rebellion of the creature against the Creator. What went wrong? When God created human beings, his intention was that they would live under his righteous rule in perfect joy, worshiping him, obeying him, and thereby living in unbroken fellowship with him. As we saw in the last chapter, he created man and woman in his own image, meaning that they were to be like him, to be in relationship with him, and to declare his glory to the world. Further, God had a job for humans to do. They were to be his vice-regents, ruling the world under him. Be fruitful and multiply, God told them, and fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Man and woman's rule over creation was not ultimate. However, their authority was not their own. It was given to them by God. So even as Adam and Eve exercised dominion over the world, they were to remember that they were subject to God and under his rule. It fell. Forgive me for the minor commercial interruption. Dominion over the world. They were to remember that they were subject to God under his rule. He had created them, and therefore he had the right to command them. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, which God planted in the center of the garden, was a stark reminder of the fact, Genesis chapter 3:17, when Adam and Eve looked at that tree, and saw its fruit, they would remember that their authority was limited, that they were creatures, and that they were dependent on God for their very lives. They were only the stewards. He was the king. When Adam and Eve bit into the fruit, therefore, they weren't just violating some arbitrary command. Don't eat the fruit. They were doing something much sadder and much more serious. They were rejecting God's authority over them and declaring their independence from him. Adam and Eve wanted to be, as the serpent promised them, like God. So both of them seized on what they thought was an opportunity to shed the vice regency and take the crown itself. In all the universe, there was only one thing God had not placed under Adam's feet: God himself. Yet Adam decided this arrangement was not good enough for him, and so he rebelled. The worst of it, though, is that by disobeying God's command, Adam and Eve made a conscious decision to reject him as their king. They knew what the consequences would be if they disobeyed God. God had told them in no uncertain terms that if they ate the fruit, they would surely die, which meant above all that they would be cast away from his presence and become his enemies rather than his friends and joyful subjects. Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. But they didn't care. Adam and Eve treated their favor with God for the pursuit of their own pleasure and their own glory. The Bible calls this disobedience of God's commands, whether in word, thought, or deed, sin. Literally, the word means missing the mark. But the biblical meaning of sin is much deeper. It's not as if Adam and Eve were trying very hard to keep God's command and just missed the bullseye by a few degrees. No, the fact is that they were shooting in the opposite direction. They had goals and desires that were categorically opposed to what God desired for them, and so they sinned. They deliberately violated God's command, broke their relationship with him, and rejected him as their rightful Lord. The consequences of Adam and Eve's sin were disastrous for them, their descendants, and the rest of creation. They themselves were cast out of the idyllic Garden of Eden. No longer would the earth willingly and joyfully present its fruits and treasures to them. They would have to work hard and painfully to get them. Even worse, God executed the promised sentence of death upon them. They didn't physically die right away, of course. Their bodies continue to live, lungs breathing, hearts beating, limbs moving, but their spiritual life, the one that matters most, ended immediately. Their fellowship with God was broken, and thus their hearts shriveled, their minds filled up with selfish thoughts, their eyes darkened to the beauty of God, and their souls became sere and arid, utterly void of the spiritual life that God gave them in the beginning when everything was good. Not just them, but us. The Bible tells us that it's not just Adam and Eve who are guilty of sin. We all are. Paul says in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And just a few paragraphs earlier, he says, none is righteous, no, not one. Chapter 3, verse 10. The gospel of Jesus Christ is full of stumbling stones, and this one is the largest. The human hearts that stubbornly think of themselves as basically good and self-sufficient. This idea that human beings are fundamentally sinful and rebellious is not merely scandalous, it is revolting. That's why it is so absolutely crucial that we understand both the nature and the depth of our sin. If we approach the gospel thinking that sin is something else or something less than what it really is, we will be badly misunderstand the good news of Jesus Christ. Let me give you a few examples of how Christians often misunderstand sin. Let me see how much time I got. I don't think I'm going to have enough time to go through this all, but I'll try. Confusing sin with sin's effects. It's become fashionable lately to present the gospel by saying that Jesus came to save humanity from an innate sense of guilt or meaningless or purposelessness or emptiness. Now, of course, those things really are problems, and many people feel deeply, but the Bible teaches that humanity's fundamental problem, the thing from which we need to be saved, is not meaningless or disintegration in our lives or even a debilitating sense of guilt. Those are merely symptoms of deeper and much more profound problem, our sin. What we must understand is that the predicament we are in is a predicament of our own making. We have disobeyed God's word. We have ignored his commands. We have sinned against him. To talk about salvation being from meaningless or purposelessness without tracing those things down to their root in sin may make medicine go down easier, but is the wrong medicine. It allows a person to continue thinking of himself as a victim and never really deal with the fact that he himself is a criminal, unrighteous, and deserving of judgment. So we will finish the rest on our next reading. The next one is going to be reducing sin to a broken relationship. I don't have enough time to complete today, but everybody have a good day. God bless. Hope in Jesus. I had a great day today. I went to church, went to Bible